how that came about was basically for a long time I've had an idea. See, I used to work on Park Avenue. I was born and raised in the Bronx, and I worked half of my adult life in Manhattan. I worked for about 7 or 8 years as a doorman. A lot of time I worked on Park Avenue, some of the richest people in the world, and then I worked as a telephone guy for a couple of years. But when I worked on Park Avenue, I worked with some very, very rich people, and one guy was so wealthy he actually had his own jet. He had a I think he had a Learjet, but and I've always been a crime. I started out with crime writing, and kind of more hard boiled stuff. My first couple of novels were about sort of Quentin Tarantino-esque sort of shoot 'em up movies, shoot 'em up cinematic stories. And so I always had it in my mind to do a kind of noir story about about a pilot of a corporate jet. Like it's because I believe Cornell Woolrich wrote a story about a chauffeur of a mobster or something like that. So I wanted to kind of update it for a kind of more modern audience and turn the guy into a pilot. And so I always had it in the back of my head for years and years that I was going to write this story. So I finally decided I was going to write. So it stemmed out of that. It stemmed out of a jet, and the idea of a jet crashing, because that was kind of part of the story that I had about a jet that crashes. And then so basically kind of it leapt from that, because then I told the story about somebody watching the jet crash as opposed to the pilot, and I went on from there, and that there's money on the plane. And in the beginning of the story, you just see this guy Michael Ganon. He's just out, a regular guy by himself. He's out on a fishing boat. It's actually a diving boat, but he's out fishing for marlin, sort of like the old man in the sea. He's out there by himself, and in the middle of the Atlantic, which is kind of gutsy if you're a fisherman to go out that far or whatever. So he seems to be a pretty common guy. But so basically, yeah. So he sees a plane. So he's coming back in. He tries to catch a fish. The fish actually it breaks his antenna on his boat, the radio. So he's like, okay, that's it. I'm going to head back to his house. He actually lives in the Bahamas, but he's an American. He's like an expat. And so as he's coming back in, he sees that a corporate plane in the distance is flying too low, and he watches it crash. And then he goes over to try to help. And actually, it turns out he's a diving instructor, so he has diving equipment. And he goes down to see what's up, and he sees that there's dead people on the plane. And then when he goes back up to the surface, back to his boat, there's a suitcase, and he opens it up, and lo and behold, it's filled with money. And so we go that it's so because there's nobody around, he thinks it's a drug deal gone bad. So he decides, foolishly, impetuously, like maybe somebody might do, right? Makes a mistake, says, okay, I'm going to try to take the money and run, because nobody knows that I'm out here. And so he decides to make that decision, except he forgot to ask, who are the dead guys on the plane? So he has an assumption about it that turns out to be wrong. So, it's hard. Writing series is hard, because the first one, there's exposition about the character. We don't know who the character is. So you can have some surprises, about who the person is and what have you. So in the second one, we kind of know who he is. So it's a little bit more difficult to, so that's one trick you can't pull again. But so, yeah, so transitioning, because I originally I never meant it to be a series, but after I wrote it and my agent really liked it at the time, and we decided, okay, I'll try to transition it into a series, because again, that was something that I had been very familiar with writing with James Patterson. I wrote, I co-wrote the Michael Bennett series with him, so I had just done that for about 10 years. So I said, yeah, okay, I kind of get the pacing of how to do a series. So I transitioned it into a second book. So he's kind of like, yeah, he's hiding out in Run for Cover, and he's hiding out because again, Michael Ganon he's an ex Navy SEAL, but he's also an ex NYPD cop. And so he's hiding out with an old war buddy, a guy who was in the war with, because one of the things that I tried to incorporate into the book when I started it was that with the whole war on terror since 2001, there a lot of these soldiers, as a lot of people know, but a lot of these guys, like in Vietnam, if these guys did 1 or 2 tours, that was a lot, right? If they did 2 tours, that was a lot. But a lot of these like Navy SEALs and Special Forces guys in the war on terror, some of these guys did 7 tours. Some of these guys did 10 tours. Like they kept going back. They come back home for a little while and they go right back. So there's a lot of people. There's a lot of Americans floating around who have that a lot of combat experience, right? So I just thought that was very interesting and actually realistic, because there's people like that floating around. And even there's another author, right? Jack Carr, who's actually a Navy SEAL, right? He was in the war on terror. And because it's funny, I remember I saw him on, I used to follow him on Twitter, and he posted a picture of himself on a helicopter, like with all the gear on. And so I tweeted him or whatever that I said, why isn't this your author picture? He looked like a real badass, right? But so this is something that people are familiar with, and so I thought, yeah, let me try to, one of the things as an author, what I try to do is, let's bring some of the headlines in. Like I love stories and thrillers that are about now, that are about things that are kind of happening now, kind of ripped from the headline sort of stuff. So that's why I wanted to make Gannon, one of these combat guys who saw a lot of combat, and so he has all these friends. So in the second book, Run for Cover, he's hiding out with one of his buddies, another guy who was a Special Forces guy, and so something happens to his buddy's brother. He gets murdered in Yellowstone National Park. He's a ranger. So it's crazy. It seems very fishy and stuff. So Mike decides to help his friend to find out what's going on with the brother's death, and then he ends up teaming up with an FBI agent to find out what the heck is going on, because there's a huge cover up going on. So that was the second book, because he's been he's kind of messing around with some of these kind of corrupt intelligence type of people. Yeah, he actually goes on a hunting trip with his son up to Alaska, and he's actually he's abducted by these mercenaries who are, what do they call it? Renditioned. He's renditioned out of Alaska down to first he goes to Mexico, and then he finally ends up in South America in some crazy prison, and he has to figure out his way out of that one. So so that's the third one, Hard to Break. And now we're up to the fourth one.
Yeah, No Safe Place. So tell fans what they can expect in the newest book. And again, we appreciate, for editing purposes, if you don't mind using the title.
Sure. In No Safe Place, Gannon is Gannon 4. He's hiding out again, but this time he's kind of he's sort of on vacation by himself. He's off in New England, and because Michael Ganon, he's a huge fisherman. He loves to fish, so he's fly fishing on one of the most famous fly fishing rivers in New England, the Farmington River, which is real. It's actually close to my house, and so he's fishing happily, just chilling out. He doesn't want any, he's vacationing. He doesn't want any more problems. But what happens is that he bumps into an old crush from his old neighborhood, and it turns out that she is up in the woods of New England because she is investigating the death of a girl at a college. She's an investigator for a law firm, so she's trying to find out about for a client what happened to their daughter, because their daughter died of an OD the year before, but the college, which has deep pockets, it's one of these kind of Ivy League colleges, and they had kind of paid off the client's ex-wife, but the client himself wants to find out what exactly happened, because they didn't give too many details. They just kind of paid people a lot of money to kind of make it go away. So when she shows up unexpectedly asking questions, the college people kind of freak out, because again, there's some kind of cover up going on. And then a whistleblower comes forward to talk to the investigator, and then and then basically people start, corrupt cops start to try to shut everybody up. So his old crush contacts him because she knows that he's an ex-cop, that he was in the military. So she goes to him to try to help us because we're getting the crazy people are chasing us. So so then basically at that point it becomes sort of these corrupt cops surround the small town and they cut the power and they shut down the cell sites because they'll do anything to stop this from coming out. So then it becomes kind of like a Die Hard in a little New England town sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun. It's but again, serious. Again, I like rip from the headline stuff. And then I always like the kind of the action sequences, and because I'm a huge fan. I mean, for my own kind of taste, growing up when I was in college, right? There were so many, like the late '80s, early '90s. I'm sure was like kind of the golden age of the thriller in Hollywood. You had so many excellent films that came out between like 1984 and say 1991, 92. And they were so geared toward thrillers. They were so serious, with really adult thrillers like No Way Out with Kevin Costner, and Die Hard, obviously the classic Christmas film, right? But those films, I'm obsessed with those films, and I'm obsessed with rewriting. Every time out, I try to write another one of those films in a novel form. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what inspires me with the Gannon stuff. Is like that's what I'm trying to shoot for. It's not that kind of serious. Have your fun, have your laughs, have your action, but also make it serious and kind of rip it from the headlines. The Girl in the Vault, it's basically, it's like The Firm, but it's about a woman. It's about a young lady. It's like The Firm, or maybe like Wall Street. It's kind of a combination of like, again, like I said before about how these great '80s movies. Working Girl was a favorite. That's one of my favorite movies about a woman. So there's the shades of Working Girl in there. Anyway, so there's a girl. Her name is Faye Walker. She's from Kentucky. She's from a very poor working class background, but she's really smart. She's really good at math, and so she gets out of her small town. Goes to school, becomes a math major, and then she gets picked up by by a Wall Street merchant bank, and where she is, she starts out as an intern, an unpaid intern. So she has to save every single penny. She has no money. She saves every single penny to go up to New York, and the whole idea is that you have to do this internship, and then maybe to get the job, or maybe not. So she's kind of bet everything she has on this, getting this job, but she feels she's a shoo-in because she's really, really, really smart, and she's smarter than all the other people that she works with. And all the other people that she works with are very rich. They're very kind of they come from privileged backgrounds. Her friend at work is this girl, Priscilla. She lives on Park Avenue. And so she feels like, okay, I hustle more than Priscilla. I hustle more than these other people. I really think I'm going to get this job. But then she kind of gets a knife in her back to the whole thing. And also she's in love. She's fallen in love with a guy who is an Irish immigrant guy who is a handsome cab driver. I don't know if you've ever been to New York City, but in Central Park, they have horse-drawn carriages. And the guys who run the horse-drawn carriages, they're all actually they're Irish guys, which I knew growing up. There was a guy in my building. He owned one of them. And so anyway, so she falls in love with this Irish guy, and they're in love and blah blah blah. So, but he's going to be. The whole idea is that she has to get this job because otherwise he's going to go back to Ireland because he's waiting to become a cop, but he's waiting on his green card. And but his green card isn't coming, and he got an offer for work back in Ireland. So he's going to leave unless she gets this job. So she's basically not only she's going to miss out on this wonderful career, she's also going to lose the love of her life. So she's devastated by this whole thing. Plus, again, like I said, she's very desperate. She has no money. So what she decides to do is that she comes up with a simple plan where she figures out a way, because again, she's very bright. She keeps her eyes open at work, and she figures out a very clever way to get away with $3 million. Oh, actually, no, $1.5 million in cash from this merchant bank. In a very clever way. It's sort of like a bank heist, but one that's never been done before, which I thought was quite clever and a lot of fun to write.